It's an interesting morning today that started out really gray and beautiful with some beautiful snow hitting the ground. And now the sun is out, got a little cold, everything's drying up. Okay, today's topic is personal development. Now, if you ask to list the concepts with which Judaism is normally associated, you might suggest that it's Shabbat observance, it's, all kinds of kashrut dietary, restrictions, the land of Israel, Brit Milah, circumcisions, and a variety of other, excuse me, ideals and mitzvot that are, very specific to the Jewish people, to the Jewish religion. There is, however, one concept, I believe, or this is the one concept that most people and cultures, will have this idea in their belief systems, and they don't realize, most Jews don't realize that this idea is central in Judaism, and that's personal development. Judaism's comprehensive, has a very comprehensive system when it comes to how we relate to understand Jewish development and personal growth. So what I want to do is, because I know that most of you are aware of these ideas, but what I want to do today's conversation is to, show you the actual sources. Like, you hear about it, Judaism is about personal development and it's about growth. And is this like a new age thing? Was it always there? And what I want to do is I want to show you, go through some of the sources that kind of highlight this idea and show you that it was always there. Now, the question you should be asking is, well, why wasn't this highlighted in our Jewish education? Specifically in elementary school and high school, there's so much of this idea of, of personal development and excellence. And that's a great question, but that's for another conversation. So now we all reluctantly are able to admit that we have shortcomings. There is no such a thing as a human being who is absolutely perfect. Some people get angry very easily. Others are inconsiderate or miserly. And, there are many people who are averse to investing time and energy where it takes time to grow to refine your character. Take it as is. This is who I am, take it or leave it. But even those people who choose not to engage in their personal development would agree that it's got value, it's valuable, it's a very good thing to be involved in. That even if people, have good traits, kindness, people that are considerate, people that are generous, people that are conscientious, they could even excel in these areas if they would only apply themselves even more. And therefore, Judaism attaches a tremendous value to the concept and practice of self-improvement. The Torah requires that each person strives for perfection and not to be satisfied with their personal status quo. There's a famous, and dramatic illustration of the Jewish commitment to personal growth during the Aseret Yemei Teshuvah from Rosh Hashanah, during the 10 days of repentance from Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, through Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. When Jews worldwide make a personal accounting of how they utilize their attributes with which they were created and whether they are on a path to achieving their mission in life. Now, another part of the year, although less well known, is the 7-week period between Pesach and Shavuot, between Passover and Shavuot, when Jews focus on refining their character traits in their rededication to Torah study and practice. Okay, so there's a great story over here of sorry about that. This is my wifey calling right now. She doesn't know my class schedule by now. I guess she doesn't. Okay, so there was a great story that I want to share with you. There was a senior division all-star baseball game of Color War. Okay, and there are hundreds of campers and staff members who were sitting on the bleachers, standing on the sidelines, watching this very, very exciting game. The score is tied 1-1. David Tepper on second base. David's 15 years old. He's in the camp's senior bunk and possibly the best player on the team. His team was in very high spirits as he took the lead off second base while the next pitch headed toward the home plate. Batter gets up, he swings and hits a line drive into the outfield. David rounded third base and he's headed for home plate as the crowd begins to roar. There was a play at the plate, and David slides into home. Catcher catches the ball and tagged him. Safe. That's what the umpire shouts out. Catcher is obviously upset, and he goes over to the umpire and tells the umpire that he tagged the runner before the boy touches the home plate. But the umpire stands by his call. Now, David's team is jubilant. They're like screaming, yeah, we won, right? They take the lead, and they're in a position to pick up some awesome crucial points for this color war. Now, this and maybe even this victory in this all-star game would give them the momentum to win the color war. Now, David was slow in standing up and dusting himself off. But as he walks away from home plate, his teammates surround him. They're pounding him on the back, good game, congratulating him, and so on and so forth. Now, strangely, he was the only one who didn't seem to be somewhat excited. So he makes his way through the crowd and approaches the umpire. And he tells the umpire quietly, he says, I was out. Now, the umpire was not sure what he had heard. And he says, what did you say? And David says, I was out. I'm positive that he tagged me before I touched home plate. Now, all of a sudden, all that, joy and jubilation turns, and everyone grows silent. Okay. Now, many people were close enough to hear what David's conversation was like. And this admission quickly, spread through the crowd. Umpire ponders the matter very silently, pacing back and forth. And after what seemed like a very long time, the umpire clears his throat and says, listen, I'm human. I can make mistakes. But if you're positive he tagged you before you reach the plate, then you're out. The game ends in a tie. On the last night of camp, the head counselor addresses the campers and the staff. And there's a lot of memories that, he says that we take home after an 8-week camp session. But if there's one memory above all that we should take home with us, it's that of David's Tepper speaking the truth after being called safe, right? What a powerful story. There are 3 heroes, I believe, in this story. David, obviously, is one of them. He could have easily have quietly accepted the winning, slide into the home plate, rationalizing the umpire called him safe, not saying a thing. The umpire could have refused to acknowledge that he made an incorrect call. And lastly, the counselor who emphasized to the entire camp how the game's ending teaches a lifelong lesson about how our characters determine the outcome of a life. Imagine how consequential the stakes are when our behavior and attributes really matter in the interpersonal relationships with family, friends, teachers, colleagues, and God himself. To some of us, achieving our potential can feel like this unscalable mountain. However, not only is this goal attainable, it is the very challenge which enables us to accomplish our unique mission in this world. If you want to see this very explicitly, look up Harambam, Maimonides, in his Hilchot Teshuvah. Look up the laws of repentance. Look up chapter 5, Mishnah Bet. And he goes and explains it very, very clearly there. Okay, but let's enter Reb Chaim Vital in a book called Sharei HaKedusha. He says as follows: character traits are not included in the 613 mitzvot, but they are the essential prerequisites for the 613 mitzvot, because they can lead either to the proper fulfillment or their desecration. Therefore, when we find that a person must even be more careful in staying away from bad character traits than fulfilling the positive and negative commandments, because when he achieves refinement of character, he will be able to easily fulfill all the mitzvot. This is a powerful idea. And what Rav Chaim Vital is the superstar student of the Arizal, is saying straight out of here that your character traits, you having good midot, is more important than the 613 commandments, which is why it's not even written in there. Okay. Enter the Vilna Gaon in a book called Even Shlema. It was one of the first actually the second book on personal development written. The first was written by the Ramchal in Mesilat Yesharim. This is another book that most people are not aware of called Even Shlema, the full complete stone by Vilna Gaon. And he says as follows. He says, all service of God is dependent upon the improvement of one's character, since character traits are like clothing to the mitzvot and are the general principles of the Torah. Conversely, he says, all transgressions stem from unimproved character traits. So what does it mean? What does it mean that, that the term clothing, right? That character traits are like clothing to the mitzvot. So the character traits are the vessels through which the holiness of the mitzvot are revealed in this world. And just as a person reveals himself through his clothing, and is apparent, and that is apparently the reason that the character traits are the general principles of the Torah, because the entire purpose of the world is to reveal the holiness in this world. Now, if you do not possess fine, refined character traits, then neither do you possess the Torah, and mitzvot for the entire Torah depends on the refinement of character traits. Not only is character refinement essential, it is the purpose of life. And this is another quote over here. The primary purpose of man's life is to constantly strive to break his bad traits. Otherwise, what is life for? That's the Vilna Gaon again. Now, a man once approaches Rabbi Elazar Menachem Shach, Rabbi Shach, the famous Rosh Yeshiva and Torah sage, with a heart-rendering question. The man was diagnosed with terminal illness, and doctors told him that he only had 6 months to live. And he asked the rabbi, how should he spend the remaining 6 months of his life? So the man expected this great rabbi to suggest a very intensive regimen of Torah study, to devote himself, every moment of his life to the spiritual pursuits of greatness. To his surprise, Shach says, work on your character traits and overcome some negative tendencies. Why? The Vilna Gaon tells us that this is the entire purpose of our existence in this world. If you only have a few months to live, it makes sense to devote these months or those months to achieving your purpose in life. Hello, this is the Rav Shach, who is like the big Rosh Yeshiva of Panovich, is telling you, don't worry about your relationship to God. Don't worry about your mitzvot. Instead, ask yourself, what are you doing to become a greater human being? How are you refining your character traits? This is a story of Rabbi Yehuda Ades, and he said this at a convention for Sephardic rabbis in 1986. He says that 27 years ago, right, there was this conference in Panovich Yeshiva graduates, and Rabbi Yecheskel Levenstein of blessed memory, the rabbi decided to speak in front of hundreds of his disciples who already were sophisticated, developed Torah scholars. These were deans of yeshivot, rabbis, and so on. Now, he lectured about the evils of haughtiness and how this attribute, influences a person and takes over his entire being. Okay, this is a quote. He said, his friend asked him, he said, is this what we came for? Right? We left our jobs, our studies to hear about haughtiness, right? Why this is what we came to this convention for? So Rabbi Levinson replied that the very question revealed the importance of the matter. A person must not think that that he is entering life and has many challenges ahead. On the contrary, right? The principal challenge in a person's life is to rectify the flawed dispositions that we all have, okay? This is the purpose of life. Okay, now, what do we do with all this? Okay, so we understand that their character refinement is a universal ideal, but it takes on far greater significance in the context of Judaism. To the point that we say the Torah, without being prepared to strive for refining character traits, is self-contradictory. And therefore, the development of good midot is a prerequisite for the study of Torah and the performance of its mitzvot. Only a person who has engaged in character improvement can properly serve God by performing the mitzvot. Character development And refinement is the very purpose of life in this world. That is the primary purpose of many mitzvot, is to bring about a character refinement. So we understand now that the Jewish approach to personal growth and development is there's a comprehensive, systematic framework of which God gave us through the mitzvot of observing his commands. Okay, we have teshuvah, we have tefillah, we have limud Torah. All of this is there to do one thing, to refine your midot. Okay, so how do we start this? Like, what's the approach, right? How do we get ourselves into the mitzvah of refining our character? The Gemara says that Rabbi Hanina taught that greater is one who acts because he is commanded than one who acts without being commanded. Gadol mitzaveh ve'oseh mimi she'enu mitzaveh ve'oseh. Why is that so? Why is it that someone who is great, this actually happened to me, where a student said to me, I'm better than you. He was in the atheist club. He's like, I'm greater than you because I believe in doing good because I figured it out on my own, but you do it because you're commanded to. But that's not what the Gemara says. That one who actually is commanded is greater than one who is not commanded. Okay, so why is that? Because it's super counterintuitive. Okay. Now, one of the classic answers to this question is that when one is commanded to act, one is automatically confronted by resistance, one's own Yetzer Hara, or the lower self steps in and says, don't tell me what to do, right? How many times we ask someone to help us out, something like the initial reaction is no. When someone says to me, do you mind? You're like, why is that? Because the ego, the I, the deep root of the personality and its spiritual core wants to assert itself, it wants independence and refuses to be subdued. Therefore, in order to fulfill a command, you have to overcome the inner resistance. And in doing so lies the secret of inner growth. Self-control is at the heart of all personal growth. And it's developed by the discipline required to obey. The commandments themselves are there to teach you how to become subservient so that you could do what you were meant to do. When one person acts spontaneously, there's no resistance. There's nothing to overcome. And the action is relatively easy. Now, it's not intrinsically an exercise in self-control and therefore has relatively little spiritual growth. But there's more here than meets the eye, right? When one acts spontaneously, motivated only by that which is within one's own consciousness, one is expressing oneself in his own unique identity. And that may be a very great thing, but it can never be greater than the individual who's performing the act itself. So the act will be a full, true expression of the one who performs it. But when one fulfills a divine command, that person is expressing the divine. A person who acts in fulfilling a commandment is no less a partner with the divine. And that person locks into the infinite dimension and reveals in the world the divine source. And that action intends to reveal the divine in this world. So the word mitzvah is based on a root meaning, which means together, partners. Gadol ha-mitzaveh, right? Far greater is the one who acts because he is commanded. The secret here is that overcoming the private, limited self, because one overcomes that individual self, one is able to arrive at a greater self. And in that process, he merits closeness with the source of reality. Do you understand that? Like, oh, my natural, predisposition is, yeah, I'll do whatever I want to do whenever I want to do it. And we're saying over here that no, the commandments themselves are there to help you express a level of divinity in this world. And in that expression of the divine, you are able to achieve a level of connectivity and partnership with God in this world. But my natural reaction is I don't want to do anything. Don't tell me what to wear. Don't tell me what to eat. Don't tell me when I can and can't drive my car. Don't tell me when I can or cannot touch my phone, right? I am just doing whatever it is that I want to do whenever I want to do it. But this is not the goal of Judaism. Judaism wants you to accomplish something completely different. right? Because this is a quote from Rav Chaim Luzzatto from Derech Hashem, or the Ramchal, or Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. He says, and this is what he's saying over here, he's saying that the Torah study leads to perfection, personal perfection. Okay, and this is what he says in Derech Hashem. He says, out of all the means that God has given to us to come close to him, there's one that stands higher than all the rest, and this is the study of the Torah. And this consists of two parts. One is in the reading and understanding of the Torah, and the other is the deeper comprehension of the Torah. With his kindness, that's a capital H, God authored a text in accordance with his wisdom, which he then presented to us. This is the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, as well as the books of the prophets that came after. These texts have a special property that when one reads them with sanctity and purity and with proper intent to fulfill God's will, he will be imbued with a greater loftiness and even a very great level of perfection. Similarly, when one works at understanding the content of these books, as well as the accompanying explanations that God presented to us, he will attain one level of perfection after another. Okay? The study of Torah is there to help build your personal development, your personal growth, and progressive spiritual development depend on your ability to grow and develop yourselves. So it was a Gemara in Avodah Zarah on Daf Chaf Amud Bet that says, it quotes Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair, who says that Torah brings one to Torah mevi leidei zihirut. The Torah brings one to vigilance, and zihirut mevi leidei zrizut, and vigilance brings one to enthusiasm, and zrizut mevi leidei nikiyut, and that enthusiasm leads to cleanliness, and nikiyut mevi leidei prishut, and cleanliness leads to abstinence, and prishut mevi leidei tahara, and abstinence leads to purity. And tahara mevi lidei chasidut, and purity leads to righteousness. The chasidut mevi lidei anava, and righteousness leads to humility. And anava mevi lidei yirat chet, and humility leads to the fear of transgression of the fear of chet, fear of transgression. And yirat chet mevi lidei kedusha, the fear of transgression leads to holiness. The kedusha mevi lidei ruach hakodesh. And that Yirat HaChet, Kedusha, holiness, brings us to the divine inspiration. Holiness brings us to divine inspiration. Okay? Now, there is a hierarchy here, okay? That we have the ability of overcoming the lowest parts of our being through using the Torah as a guidebook. And through this process, we're able to ultimately connect to God. Now, this is where I believe, so many of us get stuck with our Judaism, is that, if I told you, hey, if you want to connect to God, you want to have like a crazy out-of-body experience, you want to have a Ruach HaKodesh, you want to have this infinite connection with the divine, all you got to do is follow the mitzvot. Follow the mitzvot, study, make yourself pure, say your brachot, do your things, and within, 6 months' time, boom, you're going to have this one crazy mind-altering experience where you connect with God, interfacing with God. Everyone here would do it, and everyone would continue to do it because you have the results. You connect to the Torah, do your thing, and boom, you have this connection, this connection with God, Ruach HaKodesh. We can't do that today. This is where Judaism is broken today. That the destruction of the temple. This, by the way, is part of what we're asking for when we're asking God to rebuild the temple. It's not just rebuilding the temple. The temple is the vessel which allows us to interface with God. And therefore, when I tell you guys, hey, there's something called personal development, there's something here called, investing in yourself, and we do this through the Limud HaTorah, we do this through the development of our soul and body, through our character traits, and it leads to the ultimate union with God. And you'd feel it, it's palpable, you'd feel it, you touch it, you'd see it, you would be addicted to doing all kinds of things to perfect yourself. But because we live in a world where this system is somewhat broken, meaning it's not broken in the sense that if you work on your midot, you're going to have all kinds of blessings. You'll have a better marriage. You'll have a better relation with your kids. You'll do better in business. You won't get stressed out. You won't have all the nervousness that most people have in this world. You'll learn to let go and recognize that God is your, that God is your pilot and you're the co-pilot, and that everything that happens l'tov. It happens for the best. But there's that step that's broken, and I understand that. There is this thing called the God factor, and that the Torah was given because of our imperfection, and therefore mitzvah observance itself requires some kind of self-control. And self-control, I think we'll all agree, is at the heart of all personal growth. And I'll say it like this. For most people, the places where we suffer the most is when we when we give into our emotions. When we allow our emotions to rule over us, that's where we're making mistakes. And the Torah forces you to ask the question, am I doing something that that allows me to develop a higher version of myself, or am I connecting to the lower version of myself? So God creates all kinds of opportunities and challenges, or we call hashgacha pratit, to help us reach our potentials. Okay, a guy told me yesterday, a guy that I love, tells me yesterday that he was in a bad mood on Saturday night. His wife wanted to talk to him. He says to her, "Leave me alone. I need my space." And that was a unfortunate missed opportunity to connect to his spouse in a way in which she needed. And now he had to take a back seat in terms of his development with his relation with his wife. Okay. So what I want to do is next week, we're going to go through the ultimate role model for self-actualization and go through some tips on how we can actually improve and develop ourselves. If anyone has any questions, now is the time to ask them. Otherwise, I look forward to continuing the conversation at next week's Coffee Talk. Have an amazing week, everyone. Shavua Tov and Shabbat Shalom.